Hey guys, welcome to IB Math Applications and Interpretations with Mr. Miller. I'm Mr. Miller. I'm going to be going through some rounding and significant figures with you guys today for SL and for HL. IB expects you guys to be able to round in all of your problems, especially on the IB exam and in your IA, and so they have some standards for you guys to use throughout the year, and we're going to be kind of going through those rules. Some definitions that you might need here are at the top. So estimation, finding an approximation as close as possible to the value of a measurement by sensible guessing. This can be pretty helpful when you're working through your problems, especially on the IB exam, because when you get to the end of the problem, you want to have a general idea of what your answer should be near, using kind of the context of the problem as well as the values that they give you in the problem, such as maybe values for the length and width of a flower bed, or maybe the length of a ladder when you're reaching up to a window on a building, that sort of thing, can help give you an idea of maybe what some other lengths and measurements probably should be in your answer for a given context. For our rounding rules for IB, they are probably the traditional rounding rules that you have used all through your math careers. So if you have a number, let's say like 3.57, if you want to round to the 10th space, okay, you're going to actually look at the next number over. So in this case, we would look at the 7. And depending on what the value of that number is, you're either going to round the 5 up or down. If that number to the right is greater than or equal to 5, we round up. If that number is less than 5, we round down. Okay, so in this case, if we wanted to round to the 10th space, so this is our 10th space here, we would round 3.6. We would round up. If, however, we had 3.5, say 4, okay? If I wanted to round to the 10th space, I would look at my number to the right, just as you're used to probably in past math classes. I would round down. I don't lower the 5. I keep it the same. I would just leave it as 3.5, okay? For our sig fig rules over here, okay, we're going to kind of go through the different digits, what they represent, that sort of thing. So our first rule that we have for sig figs, for significant figures, is that any non-zero digit is always significant. Okay? So if we have a number, any non-zero digit would always be significant. So for example, if I had something like 3.45, okay, those are all non-zero digits, which means all of them would be considered significant. So in this case, if I were to decide how many significant figures are in this number, I would have 3 significant figures. Our second rule is that any zero between two significant figures or two significant digits is significant. For example, if I had something like 4,070, okay, both the 4 and the 7 would be considered significant because any non-zero digit's always significant. And this 0 would be considered significant because it is between the 4 and the 7. So in this case, this would also have 3 significant figures. Okay, this trailing 0 here at the end is not considered significant. There is a time when they are, and we're going to go through those next. So our rule number 3, okay, a final 0 or trailing zeros. That's what you're kind of more commonly going to hear them called. So trailing zeros are only significant if there is a decimal. Okay, so for example, if I have something like 4070.30, okay, I have all of my non-zero digits are significant. Any zeros that are between significant digits are considered significant. And since there is a decimal here, this trailing zero would also be considered significant. So this number here would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 significant figures. Okay. The last thing that you need, because this frequently will confuse students a lot. I get this all the time in my courses. Okay. Leading zeros are never significant. So if you have something like 0.000324, okay, these zeros here are not significant at all. Okay, this would only have 3 significant figures for the numbers at the end. Okay. Now, if there was a number in here, let's say this 0 at the front was actually a 2. Okay, now there would be more significant figures because the 2 zeros there, in between the 2 and the 3, they would become significant figures because they are in between non-zero digits. All right? But if it's just zeros in the front, they are always not significant figures. Okay? We're going to go ahead and move on now to some examples. So here on this page, we're going to round, in the first 3 examples, we're going to round to 3 significant figures. In the second 3 examples, we're going to round to 2 decimal places. Now, I chose 3 significant figures for a very specific reason, and that is because on the IB exam, and in any of your exams if you're in my courses, you always round your final answer specifically to 3 significant figures, unless the problem states otherwise. Okay, that is stated on the IB exam. It's stated, I will remind you frequently in class. I'll do it in all of the videos that I make this year. Okay, we always round to 3 significant figures unless a problem states otherwise. When it comes to your IA, if you're using specific measuring tools or you're using certain data, you don't have to round specifically to 3 significant figures if you can explain why you are rounding to a different level of precision in your paper, and that helps with, justifying you knowing the rounding techniques and that sort of thing for various criterions. But for the IB exam, round to 3 significant figures unless otherwise stated. So over here, looking at this first one, I want to round this down so there's only 3 significant figures left. Okay, so I'm going to take a look. I know there are going to be 2 here when I go to round. I'm going to round my 9 up because my 6 is bigger than 5. But when I go to round my 9 up, that's going to make that a 10. So it's actually going to end up increasing the 2 to a 3. But if I leave it as just 3.3, that is going to only be 2 significant figures, and it's asked me for 3 significant figures if possible. So what I'm going to do, because I know one of my rules is that a trailing 0 after a decimal point is considered significant, I can place my 0 in that spot. And that's going to give me 3 significant figures here as my answer. When I take a look at the next one, I'm going to look. I've got 2 for sure there. I'm going to round again my 5 up. That's going to give me 3, 2, 5. Now, if I'm going to round this number, I'm going to have to put the 0 here, but keep in mind, those zeros, those trailing zeros are only significant with a decimal. So if I don't put a decimal point, if I don't add the 0.0 there, this 0 on the end is not considered significant. So my final answer would be 3,250. You want to make sure to be careful, because if you accidentally decided, you want to be kind of thinking ahead of how many significant figures you need. Because if I looked at rounding up or down for the 2, in this case I would look at 4, and it would make me round this number down to 3,200. That would only be 2 significant figures because there's no decimal point, so these zeros would not be considered significant. So you do have to think ahead a little bit on what your which number you should round up or down in, or which digit you should round up and down in a number, so that you know if you're going to end up with 2 or 3 significant figures, sort of thing. Okay? So we wouldn't want to round to 3,200 there because it wouldn't be enough significant figures. And if I take a look at the last one here, 0.005356, remember these zeros, these leading zeros, are not significant digits. Okay? So if I'm going to round to 3 sig figs, I know I'm probably going to want to keep values in these 3. So I'm going to round up by looking at my final number here. It's a 6. That's going to make me round up my 5. So I'm going to keep my leading zeros, 0, 0, 0, 5, 3, 6. But be very, very careful, because if you put a 0 for where the 6 was, that's now a trailing 0 behind a decimal point. And so that would be considered significant. So this number here would have 4 significant figures right there. Instead, I need to completely drop that 0 off. Now I only have 3. There are my 3 significant figures. Okay. We're going to take a look down here, 2 decimal places. You know, you've done 2 decimal places in the past, I'm sure, but we're going to practice this anyway. I want to round to 2 decimal places, so I need to keep numbers in these spots. I'm going to look at 6 on the end. That's going to make me round my 9 up, but I need to be careful, just like up above when we did the 3 sig figs. When I round that 9 up, it's really going to push into the next place value. So that's going to give me 3.3, but since it specifically said 2 decimal places, I need that 0 there on the end so that I have 2 decimal places, or 2 places after my decimal. Okay, for 3,245, this is an interesting one because it specifically says it wants it to round to 2 decimal places. I currently don't have any decimal places, and if I were doing something like my IA and I wanted to make sure all of my data in a table had 2 decimal places, all I would need to do here is make clear that I don't have any actual values in those 2 decimal places. I would just put my 2 zeros on the end. There is the number rounded to 2 decimal places. I didn't actually need to really round any numbers there. I just needed to clarify that the 2 decimal places were both 0. And for our last one, I need to round to 2 decimal places, so these are the places I need to keep. I'm going to look to the next value, and I'm going to round up, because it is a 5, to 0.01. And again, I don't want to put any trailing zeros here because it specifically wants me to stop at 2 decimal places. Okay. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in class. I'm more than happy to answer your questions anytime.